Welcome to the Parable of Vineyard. My name's Adam, and today I'm joined again with my brother in the faith, Daniel. Welcome again, brother.
Thank you, Adam. I'm glad you could join these calls.
Crazy.
I'm so glad the last one was so fruitful for me, and I'm really looking forward to today's topic of sunrise, sunset. When does the day begin, and how does that impact the calendar? And I wanted to start out by saying that this was inspired by a conversation that we had after the last video, where you showed me new insight that the evening belongs to the daylight. And that forced me to go down a deep rabbit hole and do a bunch of research and was very fruitful for me. So right now we are currently standing that you've persuaded me on when the evening belongs to the daylight. And I guess last time I persuaded you on when first fruits is.
First fruits, right, right,
Now let's
exactly.
see if we can reach any type of consensus on where the calendar day begins and ends.
That sounds good. And just for everyone out there, so Daniel's taking the position that a 24-hour day, a calendar day, uh, is from when the sun rises.
No, from
No,
first light, first light.
first light. Okay, from first light to the next 24-hour first light is what you're considering a full 24-hour day.
Correct.
So, which has become, I will say, I will acknowledge, has become a very popular thought and doctrine within this movement of Yah's called out assembly. A lot of people have moved from evening to evening to morning to morning. So, and then so I take the position of evening to evening. So, from sunset to sunset. So from sunset from day one to sunset to day two. That's one full 24-hour day. So we both have we're both visual people. So Daniel will have some visuals, I'll have some visuals, and we may or may not agree, but hopefully the goal here is to see that brothers and sisters can discuss these topics that are seem to be very very popular in the body. We can discuss it without anger or hatred or feeling a certain way about each other, but still able to walk in love. So with that, Daniel, I'll give you the honor. Do you want to kind of present um, what you've been studying, and then I can present what I've got. So you can present the morning to morning argument,
Okay.
and then I'll
Before I
present
do
what I've
that,
got.
I
Yeah.
just have a question to something you just said because it appears to contradict what we said earlier already on this call. I just want to get to the bottom of it. You said that the day begins at sunset, but you also said that the evening period of time, which is about an hour and a half, belongs to the calendar day beforehand. So on
Hmm.
Passover, you said that you had the daylight of Passover where they slaughter the lamb, and you said the evening belongs to that same day.
Hmm.
But then you just said the day starts at sunset,
So
which means the
so
evening would happen after. How do you resolve that?
forgive me. So okay, so from the position I have, the calendar date changes after the sun has set and has become dark is the position I take. So let me clarify that if that
Last
makes any more
light,
sense.
then.
Yeah, last light. Yes,
Okay. So
that's
let's
that's
have
what I
let's have
understand.
some terminology. We'll have first and last light, sunrise and sunset.
Hmm.
And when I say morning, I'm talking about the period from first light to sunrise. And when I say evening, I'm talking about the period from um, sunset to last light.
Right.
Are we
Here,
agreeing
so
on those
I'll
terms?
just give a quick visual just because it can get confusing just talking about it. So just to share exactly what I'm considering here. So I'm considering this block right here is one full 24-hour period. So this would consist of the 14th, and then this would consist of the 15th. So the sunset is like the changing of the guard from the rule of the day to the rule of the night, and the night takes over and the date changes when it becomes dark right here. So I still do consider the sunset period right here part of the 14th, but as it becomes dark and then it's nighttime, it is now the 15th. That's at least how I understand it, and it remains the 15th until the next night period 24 hours later. So does that clarify a little better?
Yep, that's just establishing our terminology. I
Okay.
go ahead and,
Sure.
all right, just so that everyone can um, get a sense for what we're trying to get to the bottom of. These are the four different ways that you could structure a calendar day. And Adams, I believe, advocating that for number three, oh, sorry. Yeah. Number three, the night starts when it's completely dark, and the day ends after sunset when it gets back to completely dark. So
Correct.
that's Adam's current position. And we've got, of course, morning and evening defined as the shaded areas. And my position is up above with morning, when first light going all the way through, and of course, ending at first light. So that's the two different structures we're debating. And of course, as we go through this, we'll deal with tradition, which the Jews teach, which is over here at number 4, with the evening starting at sunset. And that's where the day ends, is at sunset. So that's where they divide it up. So it's a cycle. So you have to pick one point in time to be your dividing point in time. The Jews say sunset. Adam says at dark, after the day, and I say first light at daybreak. So that's that. And of course, there is one other option which no one is currently advocating for, which is sunrise starts the day and ends the day. Number 2 is where I used to be before my last call with Adam. Because of my call with Adam, I moved from number 2 to number 1. So I guess that's the spectrum that we're going to get into. And so I'm going to just present my simple case. Of course, there's a multitude of scriptures, but I'm going to go straight to the heart of this. There's 4 dimensions, right? Does day become before night, and is evening part of the day or the night? Those are the 2 topics. And so the first thing I'm going to address with Adam and see what his take is what I call from Passover. Right? We have Passover on the 14th. And then that night, which is the night that he passed through, which was the Passover night, they were commanded not to leave their houses, not to go out of their house. Do not exit your door until morning. And then we are later told that they left Egypt by night on the 15th, which means, of course, the daylight hours of the 15th, which come between the 14th night and the 15th night. That was the high Sabbath of unleavened bread. So that is my one argument there. And then my argument for inclusive of morning and evening with the daylight is that Yahshua rose before sunrise on the first day, and it was still the first day, late at evening, almost dark, when he appeared and showed his hands in the upper room. So that's the high-level timeline. And of course, there are the scriptures that go along with it, which are now on the screen, and we can discuss. The one thing that Adam and I share notes beforehand so that we are as prepared as possible for each other's points. And the one thing I didn't see Adam address is Exodus 12:22, which says, "And none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning," because that's when the angel of death is passing through, and they burn the remains right here. And then, of course, we know that Pharaoh called them by night. Well, if they're in their house at night, they're not going to be leaving to meet with Pharaoh in disobedience to Yah. So that night that Moses was called by Pharaoh had to be the night of the 15th. And of course, if you start the day at night, now what I have below here is the tradition. Adam's view is shifted slightly, but in general, it's night before day down here. You'll see that if the 15th started at night, they were indoor that night, then they would leave on the 16th. This would be the next night would be on the 16th. So that is case number 1. I hand the ball over to you, Adam.
Okay. Let's see if you can stop the screen share, because I'm going to screen share as well. And I think what the discrepancy that we both have here is I don't believe that there was a 24-hour period of delay of any tarrying. So let me let's see here. Let me screen share. So we'll just go over it real quick. I'll just kind of just cover at least my thought process. I definitely understand the visuals help so much, Daniels. Thank you. At least to understand your position, and I can understand how you could arrive at that conclusion. Let me at least share how I've arrived at slightly different conclusion. So the Passover was slain on the 14th, so we got to get our days straight. So we'll go with Exodus 12, 6 through 8. You shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts and on the upper doorposts of the houses wherein they shall eat. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire, unleavened bread with bitter herbs, and they shall eat it. So this is how I interpret what
While
we've
you were
just.
there on that verse, I don't have to go back to it later. That night tells me that night, what night? The 14th day. The night of the 14th day is how I
Mhm.
interpret that.
Well, I think I hear you. I think if we continue to look at other scriptures, I think it'll define that that night became the 15th. And let me share with that with you real
Yeah.
quickly. So this is a little bit different than what Daniel was sharing. So I believe that a day consists of the night period coming first, and then the day period, which of course ends at sunset and then transitions here. So how I read it here is just to highlight that they shall kill it in the evening, and then they shall eat the flesh in that night. So we also just want to share the scriptures record that Yahusha, the true Passover lamb, was slain at 3 p.m. So we know that nothing would have been done contrary to what the Torah taught. Otherwise, it just wouldn't be according to Yah's word. And this rings true for people that have done Passover and have done their own lambs. Somewhere between a noon to 3 p.m. Slaughter gets you ready to eat the meal right around sunset. Depends on how many lambs you're processing, how many people you're feeding, but that would work out. So also, as far as between the evenings, because there's some argument here where it says you shall kill it in the evening. So some people are thinking, well, you can't kill it until the sun is almost down, and that's not true. When you look at the Hebrew, it says erabim, which means between the evenings. And so what it's been interpreted is you can kill the Passover between the sunsets. Um, anyway, so my point is you're slaughtering it here sometime in the afternoon, and you're eating it here that night. And I'll like to make the case that that night became the 15th. So Yahweh slays the firstborn the same night. And thus you shall eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is Yahweh's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, such and such. And that was Exodus 12, 11 through 12. So now we're confirming that they ate the Passover in the evening the 14th, and that night was when the firstborn was slain. And consider that when you have a Passover meal, you're eating and rejoicing through the night. The death angel passed through the same night the meal was eaten. So 7 days, not eight, of unleavened bread, which the way you showed that the traditional Jews do it, they end up eating 8 days of unleavened bread, which I'll also show that those who do a morning to morning, you actually end up eating more than 7 days of unleavened bread. So Exodus 12, 15, and 18 says, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Even the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 1 and 20th day of the month at even. And so here's how I understand it. So once again, the night portion of the day is first, then the day portion, and starting eating unleavened bread at the evening, at the end of the 14th day, as it's getting ready to transition to the 15th, is the only way you can get 7 full 24-hour periods of eating unleavened bread. Because if you look from here, from this evening to here, that's 1 day. It's 24-hour period. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 gives you 7 full days, 24-hour period. And this is something I mentioned with Daniel last week, which is there's lots of different verses that people toss around in the evening to evening, the morning to morning debate, and all of them are valid. I think what we find is a lot of the verses that people use to portray a morning to morning when it says on the morrow. But what I found is on the morrow does not necessarily mean the next 24-hour day period or the next calendar day, but literally the next sunrise is what it's talking about. But for me, when it comes to an important topic like this, I believe the Torah is my foundation. And if I were to appear in a court of law, I believe I could present this evidence as proper evidence to back what I'm doing. And the reason I'm saying that is because the Most High just told us to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. Then he goes on to tell us what 7 days looks like. And so, because he says, on the 14th day of the month of even, you shall eat it until the 21st day of the month of even. He just told us how to count 7 days, and he told us that by an evening to evening perspective.
Can
Some
I
would
address
argue,
this particular point? Because I have a
what's
slide for
that?
this. Can I address this? Because I have a slide for this.
Yes. So let me just solidify this point, and then before I move on. So um actually, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead. I think I already made my point there, and I'll come back to it after.
Okay. I shares my screen and I go uh, share. Okay. So now you can see my keynote here. Because you had shared this before, I made a dedicated slide just to address uh, your points here. So we've got in the first month on the 14th day at even. Now, we've already established that evening is a period of time, which represents, an hour and a half or so. And of course, it goes until the 21st day at evening. Now, the question is the evening inclusive or not? The way you drew it, you said you started it at the end of evening on one, and you went to the end of evening on the other, which means you weren't showing the time of unleavened bread is actually aligning with your calendar days. Sorry, you aligned it with your calendar days. At the end is what you did, if I understand it correctly. So the question is, what is the justification for exclusive counting versus inclusive counting? Because if you use inclusive counting, where you include the evenings, because from the evening to the evening, if you said from night to night, which is a period of time, you would probably include the night instead of doing like the end of the night to the end of the night kind of thing.
I have an answer for you.
Okay.
I have to show it on. I have another
Let me
visual.
let me continue here, and
Oh,
then
okay, okay,
I'll
okay.
pass it back to you since it's a lot of friction to switch between.
Yeah, no
Um,
worries.
so uh, my one case is if you do inclusive counting, then it's greater than 7 days. All right. So that's the first thing. The next thing I want to address is your statement about as a sunrise first perspective. You said there's 8 days. The thing to remember is that the word day can either refer to a calendar day or a period of time or just to the daylight. And you have to infer it by context. So the way I interpret it is we've got the 15th is the first daylight, the 21st is the last daylight, and that's 7 daylights of unleavened bread. And
However, if we agreed that the evening is part of the um oh, okay, okay, I'm sorry. I need to interrupt you. Keep going. Sorry.
yeah, I am showing this to show the tradition.
Gotcha.
Of course, if I shifted it over a little bit like that, that would be what I actually think. And of course, I would go by inclusive counting. So that would be how I would interpret it. But so of course, we both agree that tradition is wrong. So if you assume that evening represents a period of time and not the knife's edge, then of course the tradition would say sunset of the 14th day actually occurs at the very beginning of their day, which it would be evening to evening, would be 8 days according to
Right.
tradition.
Right. And so that's the other thing that I wanted to flush out is I believe that a lot of people inadvertently eat unleavened bread for 8 days, which ultimately is not some massive sin, but we are commanded not to add to or take away from Yahweh's Torah. So if he says, I want you to eat unleavened bread for 7 days, why are we adding an extra day? You know what I'm saying? And I'm sure there's, well,
Right.
that's,
I think
yeah,
it's a safety thing, right? There's no commandment not to eat unleavened bread. So of course,
sure.
if there's ambiguity and you eat it an extra day, then that's
But
fine. The danger is when you become a Torah dictator and you try to tell people or fight with them that they're violating Torah by not
right, correct. Which it does happen, because the way it's typically taught is people are quote unquote commanded to eat unleavened bread for 8 days with the traditional understanding, whereas the 14th at evening is at the beginning of the 14th day, and that adds an entire 24-hour period.
yeah. So my argument is there's ambiguity here that you can interpret this verse as daylights, 7 daylights starting inclusive of the Passover night is a way of interpreting it, and that I can also see your interpretation of it. But in the case of ambiguity, you have to check for consistency with other scripture, which of course we
Which,
skip
right.
through and onto this issue of your demonstration. And I
Hmm.
think that this text at the very least is ambiguous. I would like to see how you can argue the staying indoor. um, sorry, I've got staying indoor through the
By the way,
Passover.
your camera has the camera on your mouse. Is that intentional? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, it's Keynote only uses the built-in camera.
Okay, okay. No
That's
worries.
different than the one that
I'm like,
Zoom.
it's a pretty cool shot of how you're moving the mouse around. So just want to.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and stop sharing. But I really would like
Okay.
to address the staying indoor.
I will. I mean, I'm glad you gave me a heads up on that because it's a valid question. It's a valid, yeah, it's a valid question. So I'll attempt to address that. Before I do, I at least want to give a second witness, at least to the understanding that I have as far as how the day changes. And I'll go back to the I showed you this slide before. So this would be a second witness of Yah teaching us of a 24-hour period. We know that the Day of Atonement is on the 10th day of the seventh month. We know that, right? It's what it says. You will have a Day of Atonement on the 10th day of the month. But then he goes on, it says, we'll read the scripture right here in this graphic. It says, it shall be a holy Sabbath to you, and ye shall humble your souls from the 9th day of the month. From evening to evening shall you keep your Sabbaths. What's interesting about the Septuagint is the word Sabbath there is plural. So it's kind of interesting. So here's again, the perspective I have. So look at the day as the ninth right there. You've got the night portion, then the day portion. And as the day portion is ending, you have that evening. So he's telling you to be prepared for that 10th day. You start the Day of Atonement, you start your fast at evening here, right as it gets ready to transition over to the 10th. And so then this entire 24-hour period of the 10th, you're celebrating or observing the Day of Atonement. And so that's how I understand how Abba teaches us how to count a day from this evening portion, which I don't, you said is an hour and a half. I don't know, but this is what marks the changing of the guard and the changing of the day, in my opinion. So let's go back, and then of course, when you look at the same thing, I don't think I have it up here, but when you look at the same thing for a Day of Atonement from a morning to morning perspective, only half of the day of the 10th is being observed from a morning to morning perspective.
Can I show you my slides on this? Because you brought up another point, and I've got slides on Day of Atonement as well.
Yeah.
All
I do
right.
too, and I'll find mine. So where is it at?
So, um, all right. So the Day of Atonement, I've got two slides here, one based on night and day, and the other based on day and night. But this is Adam's point of view is day, night followed by day. And so we'll address this here. So what I have here is the fast is from the evening of the 9th to the evening of the 10th. From an inclusive perspective, is if you have evening belongs to the day, then of course it lines up with basically being on the 10th, mostly on the 10th, with just an hour and a half on the ninth. If you apply it consistently, evening to evening, with the evening belonging to the night, then starting there, basically almost everything occurs on the night, and then of course only an hour and a half occurs on the 10th. This can't be it. And so what the Pharisees are doing, or the tradition is doing, is they're interpreting evening to mean sunset, which sunset's a different Hebrew word, and they're associating the sunset with the daylight hours, and the evening with the night, is what they're doing in order to get something that looks closer to this top one here. And of course, my perspective on this is, if you start with the daylight and you end with the daylight, start with the daylight, go to the night. It doesn't matter whether the daylight evening is associated with daylight or night. It's about the same period of time, one night, one day. And this is just a smaller case of the exact same situation with unleavened bread. Unleavened bread just stretches this out 7 days, but all the days in the middle don't really matter. It's a question of what's going on here. And my argument goes something like this: it's, if he really wanted it to just be on the 10th, he would say on the 10th day of the month, day and night, because that would encompass an entire period of time, day and night. By mentioning two calendar days, it's telling me that the period spans 2 calendar days, instead of all being on one calendar day.
I think you're right. We have to recognize that none of his words are idle. So here's my point. Here's my overall point. This is my main point. If I could be honest with you, we know that everything is established by 2 witnesses. The 2 times he tells us to count time is from evening to evening. That should tell us something. And that's kind of my overall point. Not as in, and then, the morning to morning perspective of teachers would say, well, it's always morning, so he has to tell us evening to evening. Well, in all due respect, our Father would tell us that. Like, he would say, like, I would imagine, just so there's no confusion, he would say, a day is counted from morning to morning. However, on these feasts, I'm going to change it up. I'm going to make it real confusing, and you're going to go evening to evening. So my perspective is 2 times in the Torah, he taught us what a full 24-hour day looks like, and I believe the Day of Atonement is vital to this as well. If I could share the screen,
Yeah, let's address what I said about staying indoor on the.
I would love, yes, definitely would love to,
because I think that verse there is the strongest case, as far as a lived example.
I can definitely understand how it would be a hang up for you to move forward with what I'm presenting here. But I think the text clears that up for us very nicely. So again, from the perspective that I have, this doesn't stay true to the Day of Atonement being on the 10th day. When I think in the context of the 10th day is the whole day of the 10th day, not just
let me remind everyone that a day, the word day can mean daylight. So it's
correct. No, I agree. I definitely agree.
And therefore, for example, daylight people only keep the Sabbath during the daylight hours, because they interpret it as daylight instead of day. So we have to recognize there is an ambiguity in the scripture when the word day is used. It could either be referring to a calendar day or a daylight, and you kind of have to.
So as Bereans, I think we have to identify what the context is here. And so when we're talking about a holy day, I believe he's talking about the entire day, not just talking about half a day. So this is just how I've arrived, that we're preparing ourselves for the 10th day at the evening, right? Just like he says in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, he says the Feast of Unleavened Bread is from the 15th, right? However, but he still tells you that you're going to start eating unleavened bread on the evening of the 14th, because that Passover meal is commanded to have unleavened bread. So you're eating it beginning on the 14th, although he says the Feast of Unleavened Bread starts on the 15th day of the first month. So it's the same thing here. The Day of Atonement is the 10th day. However, you're getting started here at the end of the 9th day, and you're going all the way through until the end of the 10th day. And so let me just go back to the at least the presentation of how I understand how this whole thing went down. So we talked about the 7 days of unleavened bread. Obviously, I don't have to go over that again. So when did they leave? This is where Daniel and I disagree. Daniel believes that there was a 24-hour period after they ate the meal until they left the next night. I believe they left that same exact night, and I think the text tells us. So I would just like to walk through that. So Exodus 12:29 through 31 says, and it came to pass that at midnight, which if I click on this, it'll show us the Hebrew says mid and then erev, so literally middle of the night. It came to pass that in the middle of the night, Yahweh smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. I think we both agree that the death angel came that night they were eating the Passover, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Okay. From the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night. So we're still talking about the same night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night. So here's what I'm seeing here, right here. So you have the slain Passover, you're eating it here, you're eating it into the night, the firstborn slain. Now Pharaoh is also upset, calling for Moses, right, by night. So I don't see how this story tells us that we're waiting all the way here till the next 24-hour period. This is all happening in the same night, right? He says, it is Yahweh's Passover. I'm looking right here at the graphic. It's Yahweh's Passover, for I will pass through the land of Egypt this night. So I don't think we're talking about another 24-hour period over here. So the question then is, did the Israelites tarry for 24 hours? Because Daniel brings up a good question, which is, it was commanded at the beginning that they would not leave their houses until the morning. So very fair question. Exodus 12:33 through 35. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, like quickly. Waiting a whole 24 hours is not in haste, in my opinion. For they said, we will all be dead men. And the people took their dough before it was leavened. I can tell you right now, you would have plenty of leavening from this night here, when Pharaoh's all upset and all that, to over here. There's plenty of time for your dough to leaven, and their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses. So you bring up a fair point. Did they break Yahweh's commandment by leaving early? Maybe. It's not the first time that the Israelites did that in this Exodus story. But nevertheless, I think that the scriptures conclude that they did leave. But you have this urgency. There was no delay until the next night. Pharaoh called them right here, right then, and then you'll see that they left. So this is what I'm seeing here. The Passover slain, eating the meal, firstborns dying, Pharaoh's upset, hurry up, get out. The Egyptians wanted them out ASAP. Verse 39 of Exodus 12 says, and they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they brought forth out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not tarry. So to me, that's the whole story of why we're eating unleavened bread. I've made leavened bread before. You would have plenty of time to leaven from this night all the way to being thrust out this night. I believe I can conclude that they left this night right here, and that's the whole reason we're doing unleavened bread, because they could not tarry. There was no 24-hour waiting period. And then it says here, verse 42, it is a night to be much observed unto Yahweh for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. So if the whole Passover, this whole story, this all happens in one night, not in a day and a half or 2 day period. Verse 51, it came to pass the self same day that Yahweh did bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their armies. And this is how I see it playing out here, because I believe the date changed from the 14th to the 15th while they were eating the meal. They were brought out the self same day. So it says that at midnight, Pharaoh rose up and called them by night. I can tell you, let's say it's midnight on the dot. I've been in the military. I've seen hundreds, thousands of people moving. Now, millions of people moving. I don't know how long that would take. Nevertheless, I do believe they left in the wee hours, and of course into that day. So he brought them this out the same day that all these things transpired, which does coincide with what Numbers 33 says. 33:3. It's the verses right here on this graphic. It says, then they departed from Ramses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month. On the morrow, on the next morning after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with a high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians. So I believe that Numbers 33 confirms what the understanding I have here, that they were leaving in the wee hours, right into the day portion.
Can I point
Uh,
out,
yes.
you just used the same tactic that you previously accused morning people using. You said on the morrow to refer to morning instead of on the next day. Um, uh, as in the tomorrow instead of the morning. So you're picking and choosing when you're interpreting morrow as morning versus next day according to a particular theory here. I see what you're saying. Um, I think we should at least recognize that uh, if you interpret that they violated the command not to go out until morning, and that's allowed to be violated for whatever reason because Pharaoh forced them to go out. I don't think Pharaoh could force them to do anything at this time. And everyone is mourning. No one wants to fight them. They're not going to be made to do anything that they don't have to do because they're basically free. Um, and so your argument here is he thrust them out, or he said, "Get out of here," and so that the people said, "You know what? You're right. We're just going to get out of here, even though we were told not to leave our doors until morning." It seems, I mean, it'd
I mean,
be
I'm with you. I think a general attitude of our, our Yah as boss. We'll move when we want to move. I mean, maybe, but I hear your reasoning. But the scriptures plainly says they were thrust out and could not tarry. And I agree with you that Yah's command to not leave till the morning should be the most important. They all should have been like, nope, no, I'm not leaving my house till the morning. Nevertheless, this is what happened. Like the scriptures tell us, this is exactly what happened. They were thrust out and could not tarry. And let's be real with each other. The whole Exodus story, all the plagues, was so that Pharaoh would let them leave. And so finally, he's not only letting them leave, telling them to go. They're ready to go. And I think the whole reason let's be reasonable with each other. The whole reason they couldn't leave until morning was so that they wouldn't be affected by the death angel slaying all the firstborns. So once that's over, once that violence has passed, or that storm has passed, if you will, there'd be no reason for them to stay in their dwellings. There's no more danger at that point. So, anyways, just some thoughts there. I'd like to just maybe just
Hey,
finish
can
up.
I
Yeah.
bring up just Exodus 13, the very next thing after they were thrust out is the consecration of the firstborn in Exodus 13. Um, so we have them leaving on, I guess, on year 15. Let's go to the calendar. Yeah, so right here, basically, immediately after they do the Passover, right, it's on sort of on the gap. You have to look at the end of 12. And it came to pass on that self same day that the Lord brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. And then um, the very next verse talks about firstborn or first fruits, which is of course more evidence for the 16th. So we've got this picture here. Of course, we know 16th is now the first fruits. So they leave, I guess on my calendar, everything has to be shifted over a little bit.
You want me to stop sharing? Do you want to put yours up to show your point? That's fine.
Yeah, let's go ahead and share screen.
I'm sorry if you felt I was being picky choosy. I definitely don't want to be in that category. I'll reevaluate. But from my studies, the word morrow, just like the word yom can mean just the daylight portion or a 24-hour period. I believe also morrow can also represent the same. And so it makes it confusing, of course, for the discussion to come to a conclusion. But at least my studies have led me to believe that the morrow can mean the next daylight period or the next 24-hour period, either one, depending on
Yeah,
the
and
context.
I'm not. I wasn't trying to accuse you of anything. We need to bring to our attention that when there's a word there that can have two meanings,
Hmm.
it's, ambiguity. And
Which furthers my understanding of the overall, the weightier matter in all of this is our love for one another and the shalom we have with each other. I think is a higher Torah than whoever is right based off of this debate, or not debate, discussion. Excuse me.
correct. The point is, as we're having these discussions, the way you have a fair discussion with someone is to acknowledge, yes, that's ambiguous. Either one is a valid interpretation
Hmm.
of that
Hmm.
particular word, and therefore you don't want to uh, judge your brother based upon which one they interpret it as. You have to
Right.
have both in your mind at the same time and consider the implications of both meanings throughout it. So you can't use it as a proof that it means this or it means that. It's not proof. It's just it could mean either one, and therefore it's ambiguous, and you
Hmm.
have to decide it. You have to make your decision based off other facts, which can't mean anything else. The non-ambiguous cases therefore define the ambiguous cases, is the way I understand it. All right, so now that we've got my slides up, we've got Passover day before night. And of course, they stayed indoor all night where the angel passed through. We don't know how long it took the angel to pass through. Um, and then they burn all the remains before morning. So there's nothing left. Pharaoh calls by night, and then they're thrust out. They have to leave immediately this particular night. And then the very next thing after they leave that's mentioned is, of course, first fruits. And first fruits would be on the next daylight, which I guess you have to go down here. You have 16th down here. That would be where first fruits falls, as demonstrated by this timeline. Now, I suppose in fairness, so you hold that Passover is on the 14th, and then unleavened bread is right here on the 15th, and that they left where I have it labeled as indoor. That's when they left, and then they're traveling on their Sabbath. Is the other?
Which is not. I know it's some people come to the conclusion you have because they're like, there's no way Yah had a walking traveling on the Shabbat. Um, which I don't know. Is that I don't know if that's something that's in your mind.
It's a point, right?
No, it
Obviously,
is. I just
if
wanted to
you
speak to that real quickly if that is a point. Um, think we have to, if we look at the Battle of Jericho, 6 days they marched on the seventh day, which I believe was the Sabbath specifically. So we had the army moving 7 days. So one of those days was the Shabbat. Um, we also see Messiah in Matthew 12. He's walking through the fields, traveling with his disciples, eating the grain. We see, of course, in Luke 4, he travels to the Shabbat or to the synagogue to teach and whatnot. The only place I know of in the Torah where it says not to journey on the Sabbath, I'm sorry, the only not to say the only place I know in any book written is the Book of Jubilees, which I don't subscribe as being scripture. I believe it. One of the reasons I don't adhere to the Book of Jubilees is because I believe it adds to the Torah. It says you can't travel on the Shabbat, but we obviously see Messiah did not adhere to that, and we also see. I know that lunar Sabbatarians hold the new moon as a type of Sabbath, right? Is that correct?
yes, it's
So
a day where you
we.
don't buy or sell, but I don't think the travel restrictions apply on new moon because there's
Oh,
lots of
okay, okay,
cases
okay.
of traveling on new moon. Ezra left on the new moon and arrived on the new moon. They
Gotcha. Okay. I
yeah,
was just going to point out that there's other instances in the Torah where the whole camp moved on the first day of the month. So okay, that's fine.
yeah,
Moot point.
yeah. So we have some ambiguity here, but we have a very clear um, that under my interpretation, they obeyed the command not to go out till morning. They rested on the Sabbath, and then they were thrust out on the night of the 15th. And then on daylight, which is immediately after they were thrust out, they're immediately told to consecrate their firstborn or their first fruits.
Mhm.
And that's the timeline there. So I don't think we need to belabor this. I think we've established your perspective that you got the proof of unleavened bread, as in the if they had all day of the Sabbath to rest, that they would have leavened bread that would be able to rise. That's a reasonable argument. You claim that um, it was the same night because of not tarrying. So
Mhm.
you interpret tarry as uh, waiting 12
Mhm.
hours is
Mhm.
tarrying.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say, well, they didn't tarry. They left as soon as possible. If you think about the number of things people would have to gather to prepare to leave, um, that would be a lot to do. And everyone's dying. They're trying to bury their firstborn. They're mourning. Uh, there's just a lot of chaos
Just
that's going on that particular night. So
it
I
is.
think the timeline gets too compressed if you try to push it in.
Consider also consider also one of the points I forgot to mention is, I mean, just part of like just kind of I was mentioning, part of the reason why we're doing unleavened bread is because they didn't have time for the dough to rise. So obviously, they were thrust out in haste. The other thing is that Yah was preparing them for a quick exit because part of the instructions of the Passover is to have your shoes on your feet, your
And
staff in
walk,
your hand, and eat
yeah.
it in haste. My opinion, the position I take is they had to do that because they were getting ready to leave that night. So let me just I just got a few other points to share. Um, what I was sharing here with the unleavened bread is the inaugurating meal for unleavened bread is the evening at 14th because we know we eat it with the Passover meal, and when you eat it all the way to the 21st day at evening, that's 7 full days. From a
Oh
morning
no,
perspective,
it's 7 days and 1 hour.
well, now if you're ending at the evening here, that's negated on this end. Does that make sense? It
Okay,
nullifies.
so you're not using a full calendar day there.
I mean, again, this is how Yah taught us to do it. So,
I'm saying
I'd
on
have to
one
reevaluate.
evening, on one side, you're not including the evening of the 14th. So during uh, from sunset to dark, you're allowed to eat leaven on the 14th.
From before the sun is down and you're eating the meal. Yeah, I mean, you can eat leaven all this day right here, all through here.
All
It's
the way
start
till including in the evening,
all the way till that Passover meal is, I guess, how I'd answer that.
and you eat the Passover meal in evening.
Yes, we eat it as the sun is going down, and so we're
Okay,
eating it
so Bice, then you're
from the end of the 14th day into the 15th is when we're eating it right here. And I think
so you got
again that
seven
kind of
days and 1 hour then.
but again, then if you're cutting it off here, you're cutting off that hour here, so it's still a full 7 days.
Okay,
So
so you stop eating unleavened bread before at sunset on day 7 here on the
mhm.
21st at sunset. That's when you stop eating unleavened bread. So
That's
beginning of evening is how
and,
you're defining it.
as you pointed out, just childlike faith, bro. Like it's what he says to do, and that's what's what he says. So he started the evening here, and you end at the evening there. So like I'm saying, whatever extra hour here is negated on the tail end here. But I see what you're saying. But from my perspective, when you do this, I feel like he's like a good leader. He's preparing you for observing Day of Atonement. You're observing it all the 10th. He's preparing you in these wee little hours before the starts. You're getting prepared and you're celebrating all day. And then you have this little change. The evening is like the changing of the guard. I don't know if you've ever seen military guys. They have their posts and then they come and they change the guard. Well, we know that there's the rule of the day and there's the rule of the night. And the Erev, which is the same exact spelling as the word Arab, which means mixture. And so
Mhm.
the evening is a mixture between day and night, and that's the changing of the guard. Exactly at what hour? I don't know. Again, this from what I understand is that the date changes when it's nighttime, and so exactly why he wants us prepared in this hour here. Maybe it is all about preparation. Hey, I want you prepared before this next day starts, so on and so forth. Um,
Okay.
the morning to morning perspective, in my opinion, does add the extra time that you're talking about here. And this is just the visual I have for that. You be starting eating unleavened bread halfway through the day on the 14th. And so it adds an extra half of a day of eating unleavened bread. So um, Deuteronomy 16:3 says, "You shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread therewith, even the bread of affliction, For you came forth out of the land of Egypt in haste. Again, just trying, in my perspective, proving the point that right here they had to hurry up. They didn't have a whole day waiting period there.
By the way, the only reason you have an extra day on your go to the um, uh, because you're translating day as calendar day instead of daylight.
Mhm.
You do not have an extra daylight.
Okay. I'll definitely can re-review that. If that's not a fair presentation, I can definitely
So
relook at that.
there's 8 calendar days, but there's only 8 daylights. Sorry, there's only 7 daylights.
Gotcha. And so from the perspective I have, Deuteronomy 4:2, you shall not add to the word which I command you, neither shall you diminish aught from it. You may keep the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim, which I command you. And so that's why, again, just from this perspective, I'm doing exactly what he says to do, and not a moment
I
more
think that
or
particular verse is disingenuous. Not I'm not trying to accuse you of being disingenuous, but it's a red herring because you and I are both trying to do exactly not add or remove.
sure.
And so when you accuse someone, and lots of people do this, that's why I'm bringing it up, not to when you accuse someone of adding or removing based upon a different interpretation, uh, an interpretation is not adding or removing.
Oh, no, no, no. I
Right.
get it. No, no. My point is he said to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. And so this model here to me stays true of 7 full 24-hour days of
We
eating
both
unleavened
we
bread.
both agree that it should be the term 7 days or 7 daylights both adhere to that. If either one of us was saying there should be, if I was saying 8 daylights or whatnot, one
Mhm.
depending on the interpretation, one of us is having an eighth day or not. But both, because of the ambiguity of the word day, uh, your brother can be not adding or removing to the word. They're just realizing there is ambiguity, and in that ambiguity, there's room for both to be um, honestly held without adding or removing.
Sure.
And when
And my
you,
statement, yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
so when you have to be very careful when you're accusing someone of adding or removing to the word. For example, I could say that you're removing from the word by ignoring that they shall not go out till morning.
Mhm.
All right,
Fair.
you're saying no, they could disregard his command, and that wasn't really a command, and they didn't really have to follow it, and
Oh,
because
I'm
he,
not saying that.
but,
No,
but,
I'm definitely not saying that at all. I'm just
but
saying that
you're saying they
what
were
ended up
disobedient to
happening,
it,
was they did leave before the morning.
right? But my point is that anytime that verse is used uh, against a brother, you have to be very, very careful. I think that it's most clearly applies when someone is bringing in extra scripture that is outside of the canon. That's when you
Mhm.
have to be very, very careful because uh, you're promoting something else to his word that is not his word, which is different than interpreting his word differently. So a difference in interpretation of something that we know is his word is not adding or removing.
Yeah.
Bringing in
Uh,
new text and promoting it to the status of his word, that has the potential of being adding and removing his word. I just want to differentiate that so that people.
Yeah. And again, to clarify, Daniel, I wasn't accusing you or anyone else of like purposely breaking that command. What I was saying is the model that I would be looking for would be one that would portray 7 full 24-hour days. And so that's what helped me to conclude that this model is correct, is because it stays true to 7 24-hour periods. So in no way am I accusing you of breaking the Torah and adding to his
I
commandment.
didn't
I
take it that way. I was just using it as an opportunity to address that.
Okay, okay, praise yeah.
Mhm.
Just a couple other verses I just want to share since we're just talking about the overall topic here is morning to morning versus evening to evening, using the Passover story in Exodus as a vehicle for our discussion. But just a couple of others that I wanted to just add to the mix. Um, each day you shall give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor and sets his heart upon it. So to me, this shows that you have to pay him before the sun goes down, or else it goes to the next day, at least the calendar day, in my opinion. Deuteronomy 21:22 through 23. And if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be to be well, and he be to be put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but you shall in any ways bury him that day. Now, obviously, this could be one of those ones where, like, hey, this is just talking about the day portion and not that 24-hour period. So this is where some of these scriptures are ambiguous, and this is why there's a
And so,
legitimate
for
conversation.
example, let's talk about this because
Yeah,
this refers to Christ. He had to be taken
exactly.
down before sunset, and you have to bury him on the same day. And I haven't had a chance to make the case with you here on this, but I believe he wasn't buried until that night, which would have been the same day. And as far as your wages, of course, this is another. Anytime you see day, you can substitute daylight,
Sure.
and like you pay them before they go home, right? That makes sense. They're not. No one. The night is almost a rest. Nothing is really assumed to happen at night during the creation week. Nothing happens at night. Everything happens during the day. So by the end of the day, you get paid for end of the daylight, you get paid for the work you did during that daylight. You complete
Fair.
the transaction. Otherwise, you're
Fair. And I'm with you. And morning to morning versus evening to evening debate can go on for hours, with both sides being able to use scriptures to their advantage, based on how you want to interpret morrow or that day. So I'm totally with you, and that's why I go back to these two witnesses, Day of Atonement and unleavened bread, being the two pillars of my understanding, and not all these ancillary verses.
and
But
can I
I'll just
bring
bring up
up
the last one. Go ahead.
go ahead. I'll let you bring up your last verse and then go. Oh yeah, this one.
Jeremiah 13:19, and it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut and charged they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gates that were there should be no burden brought in on the Sabbath day. So the perspective I have is, as it's getting ready to go dark, they close the gates before the Sabbath began. So with that, that's all I've got. I think
And
we've
my perspective on Nehemiah is the Sabbath daylight starts at first light, and they close the gates early before everyone goes to bed, so that
mhm,
it's not open all night. And that's just
that's fair.
you can always expand it without breaking it.
Sure.
So the verse I would like to bring to attention is let me go ahead and share my screen. And which window is that? So I think it's I'm going to edit some of this stuff out just to um, all right. So we have Genesis 8:22. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold, and more, which I translate as morning or frost, and heat, afternoon, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So I interpret Genesis 8:22 as giving, by example, this is the order in which things happen, and it mentions many things which we know the order of. Seed time has to come before harvest. And then summer before winter, day before night, and of course, morning comes before afternoon. In this interpretation, I'm going to reference Jubilees. I know Jubilees is not scripture. I'm not referencing it as scripture. I'm referencing it as evidence that somebody else from ancient times also interpreted it, Genesis, the same way I did, where it says, all the days of earth, seed time and harvest shall never cease, cold nor heat, summer nor winter, day and night shall not change their order nor cease forever. So the order of day and night, at least according to Jubilees and the people of the time, aligns with what Genesis is implying by example, that it is day then night. I'll let you respond to this verse, and then I'll go to the next verse. You're muted. Adam, you're still muted.
Sorry. If I could do a screen share, sorry. There's probably several dozens of scriptures that we can both kind of go back and forth with. If you would stop the screen share,
I'll just go through all mine real quick then, because switching back and
and
forth.
I'm not going to. I just kind of want to prove a point that we both can share scriptures that portray both of our scenarios. If you would just let me just show one quick scripture, and I'll show you what I'm talking about.
You want me to just look
Um,
it up on my screen share?
yeah, that's fine. Look up Leviticus 24, 1 through 3. Maybe zoom in so maybe the people watching can um, see it too. There we go. Okay. Um, so when Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel that they bring unto you pure olive oil beaten for the light to cause the lamps to burn continually. Without the veil of the testimony, in the tabernacle of the congregation, Aaron shall order it from evening unto the morning before Yahweh continually. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. And there's also, there's tons of scriptures,
Can I
like
address this
especially,
real quick? This is talk about lights. Lights are only needed from evening during the dark time. So evening when
okay,
the sun's going down, right? There's darkness mixed with it till morning when there's darkness mixed with it. It's not talking about a calendar day here. All right.
maybe not. Then of course, you've got all the scriptures about like the leper. They are unclean for 7 days, and that evening they'll be clean. The reason I believe is because that's or at night, that's when the next day starts. So what I'm saying is there's tons of scriptures that we can go back and forth, and try to prove our point. And this is why this debate rages on because both sides have a slew of scriptures that they can say, look, see, the next day starts at such and such. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'll just go through a couple last ones just to get your thoughts on. When you do a search for the phrase day and night in King James Version, you get 31 references. If you search night and day, there's 13 references. That's the numerical values or meanings of 13 and 31 are interesting. What are your thoughts on that particular outcome?
I don't get into the numbers thing. It just doesn't, I don't know, doesn't do a lot for me in the way of evidence. It just doesn't. But like I said, there's plenty of verses that, as far as like the number 31 and number 13 meaning anything specifically to me. I just don't get into numerology. It's just not for me.
What
Not
about
saying
just
it's
pure democratic? Um,
yeah, and that's
from a
why,
voting perspective, it's two-thirds day than night.
like you said, when a topic is ambiguous, I've got to go with the weightiest evidence. And to me, the weightiest evidence is what I've already presented, which is just from a very childlike perspective. Hey, eat unleavened bread for 7 days. Hey, I'm gonna tell you what 7 days looks like from the evening of the 14th to the evening of the 21st. That is to me is some of the weightiest evidence of anything that either one of us can show. And then, of course, the understanding that I have is then confirmed with the Day of Atonement. If you would, since you brought up Jubilees, and kind of giving it just a little bit of credibility as to the argument, maybe I can do the same thing. I don't know if it'll. Oh, yeah, I can't share. You're sharing. I'd like to just
Where
bring
would you
up
like me to go to?
Jubilees 49. If you have Jubilees up there, I don't think it'll pull it up on Bible Hub.
Okay. Uh, no, it's definitely not here. I'll stop the share and let you.
Okay. Because I just want to share that if you're agreeing that Jubilees carried the interpretation or thought process correctly back then,
No, I'm not.
well,
I'm saying it was interpreting Genesis. I took a particular scripture, which I
gotcha.
interpreted
Okay.
a certain way, and said that it's quoting that scripture and it's implying the order that the scripture was already saying. So the scripture is not introducing any new concepts that's not already
Gotcha.
in there. So I agree
So
that the Jubilees is evidence of what some people interpreted things. I don't believe it's scripture.
okay, yeah, I'm the same. I don't believe it's scripture either. But just like if we were to bring up Josephus, I guess I'm bringing this up in the same regard. So back then they had the same interpretation that I have, and I'll show you. It says, "Remember the commandment which Yahweh commanded concerning the Passover, that you should celebrate it in its season on the 14th of the first month, that you should kill it before it is evening, and that they should eat it by night on the evening of the 15th from the time of the setting of the sun." So the Jubilees
Go back to that
portrays
verse. because
Jubilees portrays what I was just saying here, that you kill it on the 14th and then you eat it on the 15th that night.
you eat it by night, which is different than what you said you practice. You said you practice eating that evening instead by night.
Which again, it's semantics at this point. It's like, at what point is that exact changing of the date? All I know is that when the sun's going down and it's getting dark, we're eating the meal. What this is showing me is that as you're sitting down eating the meal, you're eating it on the last part of the 14th day, and you're eating it on into the beginning of the 15th part of the day, which is the
So,
beginning of the next day.
so if we stop the share here, um, so if I could summarize what you're saying is that evening is a mixture. It's simultaneously both days, instead of being only one or the other. And if you take the perspective that it's simultaneously both days, then you can pick and choose which day, if you say the evening of the 15th day, well, there's two evenings you could be referring to. Because of the overlap.
So again, the word Erev is the same word. Only the vowel points distinguish it as a different word between Arab, describing the people living in the desert. Arab, which the definition of that word is mixture, because the Arabs are a mixture of two different races. And so what Erev is teaching us is the same thing. It's a mixture between uh, going from day to night, and we know how that looks. It's beautiful. He paints amazing sunsets, but at some point during that mixture, and maybe this will cause me to study a little more and say, hey, Daniel, the exact date change is halfway through the evening. Because if it is a like you use it on your slides, a gradient going from one color to another, at some point in that gradient, there's a changeover. And so maybe it's in the middle of the evening, right before it comes night. And this is not something that I solidified in my mind. I just know that at some point here during this mixture going from evening to or from day portion to the night portion, that date changes. And again, not
Because
saying that Jubilees is scripture, but Jubilees, at least back then, they interpreted it the same way I do, that you're killing it on the 14th, you're sitting down, and then at that point, at some point during that meal, it's the 15th, if that makes sense. So you're eating on the 15th. And we obviously know they're not telling us to slaughter it here and then eat it all the way over here like a day and a half later.
Yeah, that's like I interpret Jubilees and Enoch and all those things as representing the Babylonian perspective of the Babylonian interpretation of Scripture, and that's where when they write things like that, they're looking at Scripture, they're interpreting it, and then they're writing something down. And what they write down is not Scripture or the truth. It could be an error in the interpretation. But that's
For Jubilees, I agree with that statement. For Enoch and others, I don't agree with that statement. I believe Enoch is scripture, and that could be a good topic for the future. Is Enoch scripture? We can definitely have a good discussion on that one.
Well, there's one other sequence of events that we can go through, and I think let's go ahead and bring up my slide here just to. All right. I'm going to go look at the crucifixion timeline here, and maybe this one. All right. So this is, of course, an analog to Passover, and we know that he was in the tomb on the we had the 3 days and 3 nights argument as one thing, right? And your perspective is that lines up with the calendar days, and my perspective is it's just days and nights are counted independently of calendar days. And then this road to Emmaus thing, I think, is the crux of the evening hours belonging to the daylight of the calendar day. And you said you didn't know at which point it switched over after sunset and dark, like where is it? I'm going to try to provide some insight into that, because we know that on the road to Emmaus, it was about 60 furlongs or 7.5 miles from Jerusalem. We know that it was the third day since all these things happened. which is the crucifixion and everything they mentioned. There's the third day. And we know that it was toward evening when the day was far spent, right? So up against sunset, right? At sunset, they stop and said, let's go eat. And Joshua says he acts like he's gonna keep walking, but they insist that he come and abide with them. He breaks bread, and then they realize, oh, this is Joshua. Yeah, in our remembrance, it came back to us of breaking bread, which I think is funny, because do this in remembrance of me. And then that very hour, they got up and they went back to Jerusalem and met with the other disciples, and they found the 11 gathered, and they were telling them what happened on the road to Emmaus. And then Joshua stood before them and said, peace be with you. Well, we know that it's a 1 hour run. This is like you're a cross country runner and you can run an 8-minute mile for 8 miles in a row, at least 1 hour, to go from sunset to in the upper room. Of course, John says it was at evening on the first day of the week and the doors were shut. So it's still the first day of the week, at least an hour. If they were walking, it's 2 hours after sunset. And so that we know that the first day of the week goes there. Now, this is clear evidence to me that the evening or the mixture time, the majority of that mixture, even to like the last little glimmer of light, has to be accounted to the first day of the week, because otherwise there just was not time for the disciples to run from Emmaus to Jerusalem. And of course, the resurrection starts the day at first light, because it was, there's all those verses here, very early in the morning, while it was yet dark, upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning. It was just after the Sabbath was passed, so it's up against the Sabbath, and very early in the morning. So we know that was the entire daylight here. The first light was the first day of the week, and last glimmer of light of evening was first day of the week. What do you think about that for solidifying the evidence that the day of the week cannot end until dark?
Yeah, yeah, I would say that's I probably need some a little more time to study this. I haven't at all. But I can see, well, I agree, I guess, that the evening portion starts during the day portion. But again, at some point, it turns over to the night and the next date changes. But I agree that either a majority or at least the beginning of it starts in the daylight portion. It belongs to the day, and then it's given over to the night at some point. Yes, I'm glad you brought this slide up here. We've had some discussions, and this will bring up probably a follow-up study, at least on my part, whether we discuss it or not. Those of us that are evening to evening, this brings up a question: at what point, does the Shabbat end? Does it end when the sun crosses the horizon? Is it at the civil twilight, nautical twilight, astronomical twilight? And so we've actually had some friendly discussions, because, like, as you said,
Isn't it
there could be an
when does
hour and
the
a half
Shabbat begin?
difference. So what?
Isn't this when the Shabbat begins?
Yeah, or ends. I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like, typically, like, for us on Saturday night, for like, hey, we need to go get diapers for the baby. When are we safe? And so, anyways, but that's obviously you're bringing it up for a different reason. So please.
Well, I was just bringing it up to show the timeline of about an hour and a half and how fast they would have to run. And it was already, the day was long spent up against the evening. So this is the time frame in which they were running from Emmaus back to the upper room. And what it tells me, I used to run cross country.
Me too.
I know that running 7.5 miles in 1 hour is a workout.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's, yeah.
Right. So
Quite a bit.
if they were going any slower than that, you know, when there's just not a lot of time here. So if he appears in the upper room after they get there and they tell the whole story of everything that happened, all right, and of course it was already up against sunset when they invited in and broke bread. So it's just a very narrow window of time, which basically establishes that all the way to night is all part of the first day of the week, starting at first light is also first day of the week when he rose. So that establishes that if at least from this account, that the first day of the week from the daylight hours all belong to the first day of the week from first light to last light. Now, whether or not the night is on either side of that on the calendar day, that's a separate thing. In my previously, I assumed that this had to be at night by the time the disciples arrived. The text only says evening is when he appeared with them. I assume it's still evening. But you know, I don't know if you could interpret evening as being any time, like how late does it go into the night?
Well,
But
I guess, evening can consist of from 7:04 p.m. all the way up until 8:28 p.m., I guess.
yeah,
Uh
that's
is
how I
and
interpret it.
yeah. Yeah.
There's one other thing now that we've agreed that this evening is associated with the daylight. That I've got this interpretation of Genesis, which I'd like your opinion on. It says, the light the greater to rule with the day, and the light the lesser to rule with the night and the stars. Now, we've just been defining day and night, and now we know that night is last light, and day starts at first light. So if the moon has authority or rules at night with the stars, how can the moon have authority in the evening?
That's what I'm saying. So go back to the previous slide. So those of us that do look for I'm assuming you're alluding to the sliver, correct?
The
And how
silver
that could
moon
work out
is only visible
during that. So that's what I'm saying. You can't see the moon until let's say from this perspective here, it's typically at least 15-20 minutes till after the sun sets till you can see that first visible sliver. Otherwise, you're just not seeing it. And
nautical
so
twilight.
perhaps nautical twilight is where you can see it. Now, I find that kind of interesting because let's say there is let's just call it an hour and a half total time from the time from the sun crosses the horizon to it being completely dark. Let's say there's an hour and a half. Perhaps at minute 45 is the exact halfway point, is that's the changing of the guard. And that's typically when you can see the moon. So perhaps that may bring it to a little more precision of exactly when is it considered the next day, at least from my perspective. I know you're not dealing with that because the next day starts with the next first visible light. But
Yeah,
at
well,
least from my
the question is,
perspective,
it's still evening. So, um,
and yeah,
so there's, yeah, and we've just established that when Yahshua appeared, it was still the first day of the week, which had to be in astronomical twilight, not nautical twilight. So it can't have the change in the guard here, or they ran 7 miles in 45 minutes.
yeah, I'll have to spend a little more time on this. I've actually not looked at this perspective. Uh, as far as the exact timing of how long it took and whatnot. So I need a little more time to give a full answer on that. But at least the perspective I have, at some point during this period, the day officially changes over, and to me that doesn't hinder a sliver moon starting the month because once again if there's a changing of the guard and a changing of the date during this time, well, that's exactly when the sliver moon appears. So it appears that it would come right on time for changing the day and changing the month.
So you're
What
saying
exact
both the
minute
moon
marker
and the
that? What
sun,
exact? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
you're saying the sun and the moon rule at this time?
No, the sun's already down. The sun's already set, so it's not ruling anything at this point. At this point, now the night's taking over, and the moon
Whoa, whoa,
officially
whoa.
takes over. Some point during one of these twilights, either civil, nautical, or astronomical. I don't know. I don't have an answer at this point. But it
So
just so happens, again, that is when I understand the date change, and that's when the new moon is actually visible. To me, that's a little even more confirmation that the day and the month would change over at some point during this period. Exactly what minute marker I don't know. Maybe exactly halfway through. Maybe
but
halfway through
if it
nautical
changes
twilight.
exactly halfway through, and just this is something to go investigate further.
But just real quick, if the date still changes over, it's still considered evening. I don't know. It's so the text could still ring true that it's still evening because night hasn't fully encompassed. There's still a mixture of day. So evening, as we're walking through this, evening is a mixture of day and night. Right? I know we've already established that. So even if it's leaning towards the night, but still a little bit of sunlight, there's still that mixture, and so it's still technically evening. I don't know.
Well,
Maybe I'm just
my point is at the very end of evening is what the Emmaus account points toward being the cutoff of the day, because if you move it any further up, the disciples have to get Olympic class runner status uh, to make it happen, and that's my evidence that the changeover has to happen all the way down here.
mm,
And of course, if you have calendar days um, that start like that, and that's when the daylight is, then there's no authority of the moon during the time that's considered the day, uh, and the moon's authority would kick off at night. So just something to think about. I know
yeah,
we're not going to get
interesting.
to the bottom of it here. Thank you so much for coming on and trying to address this
Nice
question.
picture. Nice
Uh,
thumb.
Thank you. Uh, because this is more than just an academic exercise. Based on how we've interpreted these things, you and I have come up with different conclusions on the Sabbath, the start of month, start of years, when the feasts are, and ultimately how prophecy is understood. And that's why, having iron sharpen iron is important, because we both need to get to the bottom of it, and at least we can see how where the ambiguity is and which parts of scripture that, which way we are leaning in order to arrive at a different conclusion.
Sure. I agree. And at the end of the day, we disagree on when the day begins. We disagree on the exact walking out of the Sabbath, how to calculate the new month, and all that, but we can still be friends and hang out. Praise, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the big lesson to be learned here. So yeah, awesome.
And when two people disagree, it encourages both to seek out the scripture in order to understand him better.
Hmm.
Um, and the biggest danger you can have is to be too comfortable with your belief that you stop hearing new scriptures and other interpretations, because then you fall into tradition. It might be your own tradition. I've always believed this, therefore I'm going to continue to believe this, instead of being open, hearing new things, and making sure you can understand and articulate the position of those who disagree with you.
Hmm.
Because until you can understand and articulate their position and understand how they can reasonably arrive at it, and know where you differ, like where you say, oh, this is ambiguous, and I choose one interpretation and they choose the other interpretation, and that choice is neither right nor wrong. It's an opinion of the person who's making the choice. Um, it's just a matter of weighting, and sorry, of your personal weights on the different things. But that's the key, and that's how we both get stronger, because I get to see new scripture verses, you get to see new scripture verses, new perspectives, and sometimes we do shift. I shift when my
We
day
we
comes. and you
we both
shifted?
shifted. I like we mentioned last week. For those of you that follow the calendar we do, I'm going to be making a big change for next year at Passover. I originally did the first fruits is calculated after the first weekly Sabbath that falls within the week of unleavened bread. But based off of our discussions, I've reviewed that, and I do believe that the second day of unleavened bread is always going to be first fruits. And you said it yourself, Exodus 13, is right, which seems to be the second day of unleavened bread. They were commanded to give the offerings of their firstborn, and which would relate to the first fruits. And so and yeah, some of the other. So I'm making that change. And so even though we haven't changed our positions overall on morning to morning or evening to evening, we've changed our positions on other things. So it shows that we're both coming into this with humility and meekness, which is part of the fruits of the spirit, and something that's required of us. Not just if you feel led to be meek or humble, you can. He's commanded us to do that. So
I really appreciate
that's showing me that we're both coming into this with humility and meekness. So praise yeah.
Yes, I really appreciated your YouTube sermon that you gave this past week, I think, on humility.
Oh,
Yeah,
praise yeah.
yeah, that was very good thing to remember because I think it's very easy to have pride in our understanding of Scripture, in our understanding of prophecy. Uh,
Hmm.
the and so when you start talking about prophecy related things, there's all kinds of people that are quick to throw out false teacher and this accusation, that
Right.
accusation um, against you. And you have to be very, very careful accusing anyone of being a false teacher. They might be someone who's seeking and studying and coming to a different conclusion like we've come to.
Yeah.
Does that make you a false teacher because you teach one way and I teach another way? We are both seeking the truth and trying to understand it to the best of our ability to understand it. Um, and even though we disagree, and clearly one of us is wrong, um, but that doesn't make either one of us a false teacher, as in knowingly teaching or spreading lies
Right.
in order
And
to get.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I come from the perspective that we're doing the best we can. We're all like little babies, little children waking up. We didn't grow up in Torah. We didn't grow up with our fathers, our grandfathers, our great grandfathers doing this. And so I think we're like little children just doing our best to follow what daddy's told us to do. And at least the perspective I have is that I believe that as long as your heart is right and you're walking in love with your brother, and I think, even though we may do the Sabbath differently, the calendar differently, the feast days differently, I believe we'll both be accepted into the kingdom. I don't think this is you have to find the right dates or else, you're tossed out, which is actually one of the other reasons why I've tossed out Jubilees. Jubilees is the only book that makes you feel like you're sinning if you do it on the wrong day. You know, um, Anyways, it's a whole other point. I'm going to be coming.
I would argue that it's probably right on that point, but there's a difference between intentional and accidental sin.
Maybe so. Maybe
And
so. I'm getting ready to do an in-depth study on the Book of Jubilees and why I don't think it's scripture and whatnot. But
yeah,
um,
I agree with
the
you.
the point the point being is I don't think Messiah is going to be like bringing people in because they got the calendar right, but their heart was wrong. I believe, at least from reading from our master's words, is that he's the type that is looking for someone who's walking in love more so than the right calendar. That's just my opinion. And I don't say that to diminish any of the importance of the calendar. I think the calendar is important, but I think there are weightier matters in how we treat each other. I think is paramount. And I think that's where a lot of people miss it on the calendar. I think some people spend so much time on the calendar and forget to love their brother. And I think they've missed the overall greater points of what Messiah came to teach us. So,
and
with that being
I'll add to
said,
that that seeking the truth is more important than the destination because he
mm,
is the truth. We're supposed to seek him, and everyone has different uh, experiences, mental capabilities. We're not all of equal intelligence. And so we're not all going to be able to arrive at the same conclusions. And I don't want to be judged based upon whether or not I got it right. And so you're going to be judged by the standard you use against other people.
mhm, yep,
So if you're judging other people and condemning them because they got something wrong, then you better be so sure you're right because that's going
on
to
everything.
be, yeah, that's going to be the standard that's going to be applied to you.
Yep.
And that's where the humility comes in. That hey, you could be wrong. But the flip side of this is other people say, you know what, it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong, so I'm not even going to investigate it. I'm not going
That's
to
the wrong
seek to
heart.
know the truth.
Usually people that are like, I can't get it right. So that's a growing movement within this sport community. There's people that are like, they're teaching that since we just don't know about the calendar, we might as well just leave it alone and not do the feast days, not do the Sabbath, and just leave it. I think that's the wrong heart too. I think Abba is looking for his children that want to do it with all their heart, and even if they get it wrong, he sees their heart that they wanted to do it with all. I think that's who he's looking for, not for people that are like, I don't know, so I'm just not going to do anything. It reminds me of mainstream Christianity that'll misquote James that says if you offend one point in the Torah, you offend all. So they're like, see, we're gonna mess up. So not do any of the
Let's send
Torah.
the bound, right? So grace can increase.
Right. So the perspective I have is let's try with all of our heart. Okay, if we can't keep all the Torah commandments, all right, what can we keep? That's what I'm interested in. I want to keep those. And I believe we serve an Elohim that's like, I like that heart. I can work with that. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adam. You've taught me so much, and I appreciate
likewise,
all you do.
praise Yah. Hey, shalom, everyone. Yah willing, we'll see you next week. And I
Yep.
don't know what the topic is yet. All right, shalom.
See you around.